One morning in August, you walk to the hive and lift the lid, and there is nothing. Not a dead bee, not a struggling cluster, not a sign of disease to diagnose or a pest to point at. The comb is there, the frames are in place. In some cases, there is even honey still sitting in the cells. But the bees are gone, every single one of them, queen included, and they are not coming back. This is not a swarm. A swarm leaves half the colony behind with developing queens and a functioning brood nest. This is something different. This is a colony that made a decision, prepared quietly for several days, and then vacated the premises completely. Most beekeepers who experience it once spend weeks trying to explain it. They blame the heat, the location, a bad queen, a neighbor's pesticides, bad luck. Almost none of them ask the question that would actually prevent it next time. What did I not give them that would have made them stay? Here is what makes absconding so consistently misunderstood. It looks like failure. A hive that just stopped working. Bees that simply gave up and left. That framing is exactly wrong. Absconding is not failure. It is a decision, made collectively and with biological precision, that this particular location is no longer worth defending. The colony is not abandoning its responsibilities. It is exercising the oldest survival option available to it: finding a better home. The beekeeper who understands that distinction stops asking why they left and starts asking something far more useful. What was not being provided that would have kept them committed to staying? Those are not the same question, and only one of them has an answer the beekeeper can act on. Absconding is also far more common than most beekeeping literature acknowledges, because the colonies that abscond most reliably are the new installations, the summer packages, the swarms caught in traps with nothing transferred in, the ones with nothing to lose. If this biology-first breakdown is useful, a like helps more beekeepers find it. Before any mechanism or history, here is something worth watching for right now in August. Because the signs of a departure preparation are visible for several days before a colony actually leaves, and most beekeepers walk past them without reading them at all. A colony preparing to abscond goes quiet. Not sit quiet, not dead quiet, but a specific reduction in the intensity of normal activity. Fewer foragers departing in the morning. Entrance traffic slower than the weather and the season should explain. The queen's laying rate drops measurably. Nurse bee activity around the youngest brood decreases. Workers begin consuming stored honey rather than depositing it. The hive is not dying, it is packing. A colony that shows these signs over 2 or 3 consecutive mornings in August is worth opening and examining. Not for disease, but for what is or is not in the cells that matter most to whether a colony stays or goes. Traditional beekeepers working before the queen shipping industry and before plastic foundation existed understood something about colonies that most modern management instruction has quietly abandoned. A colony's decision to stay in a given location is not a passive default. It is an active, ongoing evaluation. And that evaluation can tip either way, depending on what the colony finds when it looks around the hive. The beekeepers who rarely lost colonies to absconding were not simply lucky. They were managing specific conditions that kept the colony's investment in the current location consistently higher than the perceived value of leaving it. That management was not complicated. It did not involve products or treatments. It involved understanding what a colony needs to feel committed to a place, and providing it before the colony had any reason to question whether it should stay. The records that survive from period apiarists show a consistent thread. The operators who managed large numbers of colonies without losing them to summer Turk events were the ones who paid closest attention to what each hive contained at the start of the stress season, not what they added after the departure signs appeared. The mechanism that makes this work comes down to one biological reality above all others. A colony will almost never abscond when it has open brood, eggs and young larvae actively being cared for by nurse bees. Open brood produces a specific chemical signal, a blend of compounds from the developing larva that nurse bees are neurologically bound to respond to. Those nurse bees, while they are actively provisioning larvae, do not leave. They cannot leave in the behavioral sense. The brood pheromone holds them in place more powerfully than any external threat pushes them away. And because nurse bees make up a large proportion of any functioning colony's indoor workforce, a colony with a strong, healthy brood nest is a colony that has most of its population chemically anchored to the current location. The bees are not staying out of loyalty or habit. They are staying because the larvae in those cells are producing a biological signal that overrides the departure impulse. This is the mechanism that holds a colony in place through ordinary summer stress, better than any entrance reducer or physical barrier a beekeeper can install. Because it works from inside the colony's own biology, rather than against it. The second layer of the anchor is the comb itself, particularly dark comb that has been through multiple brood cycles. A frame of established, well-used comb carries a chemical history that a colony reads as home. The propolis ceiling of the hive, the brood pheromone traces absorbed into the wax over successive seasons, the accumulated scent signatures of thousands of bees that lived and worked in that structure. All of it communicates to a new or stressed colony that this is a place that has been lived in before, defended before, survived in before. New foundation communicates the opposite. It smells of plastic or fresh wax, of a place that has never been colonized, of a location with no investment history. Asking a colony to commit to an empty plastic frame is, from the colony's biological perspective, asking it to commit to a place that has no evidence of ever being worth committing to. This is why experienced beekeepers who kept established apiaries with well-used equipment rarely lost colonies to absconding. Every hive already smelled like home, and every hive already communicated a successful occupation history to any colony living in it. Managing a supply of established drawn comb is, in practice, what separates apiaries that rarely experience absconding from those that experience it regularly. The practical challenge for many beekeepers is that dark, well-used brood comb requires time and established colonies to produce, which means it is not available at the moment a new package arrives and needs it most. The solution that traditional beekeepers used is to maintain a rotation of retired brood frames rather than disposing of them. A frame pulled from the brood nest after 4 or 5 seasons of use, dark, dense with accumulated cocoon material, carrying the full chemical history of the colony that lived in it, is not waste material to be melted down. It is one of the most valuable absconding prevention tools in the apiary, and treating it that way means keeping a small reserve of such frames specifically for new installations and stressed summer colonies. A single established apiary that cycles its older brood frames into new installations rather than the wax press has a structural advantage over one that replaces everything with fresh foundation every few years. This is the part that reframes the absconding problem entirely. Most absconding events in managed apiaries do not happen because the bees found the conditions intolerable. They happen because the bees were never given a reason to stay in the first place. A new package installed on empty foundation with no transferred brood and no established comb has zero biological investment in that box. It has no larvae to anchor the nurse bees, no chemical history to signal a viable home, no returning foragers yet who know where to come back to. That colony is not committed to that hive. It is visiting, and visits end. The beekeeper who has experienced this once, who opened a hive and found nothing where a colony used to be, knows exactly the specific silence that an empty box produces. It is a different silence from a healthy, quiet hive, and it is unmistakable. The colony's absconding decision, when it comes, follows a threshold logic that historical operators understood intuitively, even without the biochemical vocabulary to describe it. The colony is continuously weighing two things: the cost of staying against the cost of leaving. The cost of staying is driven by whatever is stressing it: heat, pests, disruption, disease, resource scarcity. The cost of leaving is driven by what it would lose by going, primarily the brood it would have to abandon, the comb investment it would leave behind, the established foraging routes its foragers have built. When stress outweighs investment, the colony leaves. When investment outweighs stress, it stays and fights. The anchor is not a trick. It is the investment side of that equation, deliberately loaded in advance. A colony with a strong brood nest and established comb has a great deal to lose by leaving. A colony with empty foundation has almost nothing. Historical commercial operators, who rarely lost colonies to absconding, were not doing anything mystical. They were loading the investment side of that equation deliberately every time they installed a new colony, and checking that it remained loaded at the beginning of every stress season. If this research is useful, the Join button below supports it. Members get the monthly Beekeepers Almanac and the historical recipe cards. There are stressors severe enough to override even a strong anchor. And it is worth being clear about what those are, because not every absconding event is preventable by comb management alone. A colony under sustained, severe small hive beetle or wax moth pressure, where the comb itself is being actively destroyed, can lose its investment anchor in real time. The brood is being damaged, the comb is being demolished, and there is nothing left to stay for. A colony exposed to a pesticide event severe enough to kill nurse bees faster than the brood pheromone can bind them will lose the signal that holds it in place. A colony in a location with no shade, in sustained temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, is fighting a physical environment that threatens brood viability, regardless of how much comb exists. In each of these cases, the anchor reduces the probability of absconding, but cannot guarantee the colony stays. The stressor has to be addressed. The anchor is what holds a colony through ordinary seasonal stress. It is not a fix for extraordinary conditions. The traditional management protocol that prevented most absconding events was built around a simple rule: never install a new colony into a location with no established material. When installing a package or swarm, the first step was always to provide at least one frame of drawn comb and, wherever possible, a frame of young brood from an existing colony. The brood committed the nurse bees immediately. The drawn comb gave foragers a familiar orientation reference and gave the queen a place to begin laying within hours rather than days. The colony arrived at its new location already partially anchored, already with something to lose by leaving. Operations that transferred established comb and brood at every installation reported absconding events as occasional anomalies rather than regular seasonal losses. Operations that installed packages on bare foundation and hoped for the best lost colonies to absconding with a frequency they attributed to bad luck, bad stock, or bad location, none of which were the actual cause. The distinction between absconding and swarming matters here, because the management responses are different, and confusing them leads to exactly the wrong intervention. Swarming is a reproductive event, a healthy colony dividing itself, with the old queen leaving with about half the workers, while the remaining colony raises a new queen and continues. The colony left behind is still viable and still committed to the location because it still has a brood nest, still has comb investment, still has a functional home. Absconding is an emergency evacuation. Every bee, including the queen, decides the location is no longer viable and leaves entirely. A beekeeper who responds to early absconding signs as if they are swarm preparation installs a queen cell and waits, which is the worst possible response. A beekeeper who responds to swarm preparation as if it is absconding risk removes brood to anchor the colony, which solves a problem that did not exist and disrupts a healthy reproductive cycle. Getting the diagnosis right is the prerequisite for any useful intervention. The brood cycle timing matters more than most anchor discussions acknowledge, and getting it right significantly improves the reliability of the intervention. When a frame of young brood is transferred into a colony that is beginning its pre-departure evaluation, the critical question is not simply whether larvae are present, but whether those larvae are young enough to require sustained nurse bee attention through the next 10 to 12 days. A frame of predominantly late-stage larvae, within 2 or 3 days of capping, provides only a brief window of nurse bee binding before those cells are sealed and the pheromone anchor fades. A frame containing eggs and very young larvae, the first 3 days of larval development, provides a full 12 to 14 days of nurse bee commitment before the youngest larvae are capped. When assessing what to transfer for an anchor intervention, the age of the larvae on the selected frame is not a minor detail. It determines how long the commitment holds, and 12 days is usually enough to carry a colony through the worst of the August dearth pressure. Most beekeepers who understand the anchor concept and try to apply it still make one consistent error. They apply it after the colony has already begun its departure preparation, at which point the commitment calculus has already tipped, and adding a frame of brood is unlikely to reverse a decision the colony has made at the population level. The anchor works most reliably when it is in place before stress arrives, not in response to it. A colony that enters August dearth with an active brood nest and established comb already has its investment locked in before the season becomes difficult. A colony that enters August with a thin or absent brood nest and minimal comb history has no buffer when the stress begins to build. The beekeepers who almost never experienced absconding were not the ones who reacted fastest when the signs appeared. They were the ones who managed the commitment conditions continuously, so the signs rarely appeared at all. This is the counterintuitive rhythm of preventive management. The work that prevents absconding is done weeks before any sign appears, and when it is done well, the prevention is invisible. August is the specific month when this risk peaks in most temperate climates, and understanding why tells you exactly when and how to intervene. The summer dearth, the period when major nectar flows have ended and foraging income drops sharply, typically overlaps with late July through August in most of North America and much of Europe. The colony's population has peaked or is declining. The queen's laying rate has naturally dropped in response to reduced foraging income, and the brood nest is often contracting. At exactly this moment, when the colony's internal investment is at its seasonal low, the external stress often peaks. Temperatures are highest, small hive beetle pressure intensifies in warm climates, yellow jacket and wasp pressure on the entrance increases, and the hive is most likely to be running short of incoming resources. The investment threshold tips most easily in August because stress is high and the biological anchor is at its seasonal weakest. A beekeeper who understands this seasonal convergence enters August with every colony already carrying a brood anchor secured weeks earlier, before the dearth made securing it difficult. The practical protocol that I use to move through August without losing a colony to absconding is built around one simple discipline. At the first inspection of August, I pull a center frame from each colony and assess the brood nest directly. If there are at least 3 frames of open brood with eggs and young larvae visible, the colony has its own anchor and monitoring is sufficient. If the open brood is thin, less than 2 frames, or only capped brood with no eggs or young larvae, I transfer a frame of open brood from a stronger colony into that hive immediately. I do not wait. The frame goes in before the dearth fully locks in, before any stress response has begun, before the colony has any reason to start its evaluation. A single frame of open brood transferred on the first inspection of August has reliably prevented the pre-departure sequence from beginning in colonies that were heading toward it. The timing is the entire point. A frame transferred on August 1st does something that a frame transferred on August 15th, after the signs have appeared, often cannot. There is a partial tool worth knowing about, because it appears in almost every list of absconding remedies and is genuinely useful in specific circumstances. Placing a queen excluder below the brood box entrance to prevent the queen from flying out. This physically prevents the departure for as long as the excluder is in place. The colony cannot abscond without the queen, and with the queen trapped inside, the workers will not leave either. It buys time. But it is a delay, not a solution, and it must be paired with actually addressing whatever drove the departure impulse in the first place. A colony held in a location by force, while the underlying stress continues, will decline inside the box rather than leave it. The excluder buys the beekeeper several days to find and fix the cause. It is not a substitute for the anchor itself. The most important thing about the excluder method is that it reveals the beekeeper has already missed the earlier window, the anchor window, and is now working in reactive mode. It is better than nothing. It is not as good as what could have been done 3 weeks earlier. The knowledge of how to anchor a colony disappeared from mainstream instruction, the same way most pre-industrial beekeeping knowledge disappears. It was specific. It required observation. It did not need to be purchased. And it was gradually replaced by advice structured around products. A queen cage for introduction, a new package from a supplier, plastic foundation from a catalog. Each of these created a situation where the anchor was absent by design, and the solution offered was to buy something else. The old protocol required nothing from a catalog. It required other hives, established comb, and the willingness to move a frame or two. The practice faded not because it stopped working, but because there was no commercial interest in teaching it. The result, which plays out in apiaries every August across climates that have managed honeybees for centuries, is that the same preventable loss repeats itself as if it were inevitable, when in most cases, all that was missing was a single frame of appropriate material placed at the right moment. What replaced the anchor protocol in mainstream instruction was not a better solution. It was a simpler one that suited the commercial model better. Install the package, hope it stays, replace it if it absconded. The economics of the queen and package industry depend on repeat purchases, and a management practice that reliably prevents the losses that drive those purchases is structurally inconvenient to promote. The beekeepers who discovered and kept practicing the anchor protocol through successive generations were the ones managing their own permanent colonies with their own established equipment, with no catalog between them and the outcome. They observed what worked. The observation was correct. The practice worked every time it was applied correctly, and it required nothing from a supplier. What was lost was not exotic knowledge. It was the kind of practical observation that any beekeeper develops after watching enough colonies, long enough, in enough different conditions, to notice what makes the difference between the ones that stay and the ones that do not. What I look for now in late July and early August, at every hive, before anything else, is whether the colony has open brood, eggs and young larvae in the center of the nest. Not capped brood alone, not stored pollen or honey, eggs and larvae. If they are there, in good quantity, I close the hive and move to the next. If they are absent or thin, I act that day. The observation takes 2 minutes. The frame transfer, when it is needed, takes 10. And those 10 minutes, applied before the dearth builds pressure on a colony with nothing to hold it in place, prevent the morning in August when you lift a lid and find nothing but empty comb. That 2-minute check, built into the August routine before anything else, has been more protective than any combination of treatments or products applied to manage the risk of losing a colony in the most stressful month of the beekeeping year. The broader principle underneath all of this is one that applies beyond absconding to much of beekeeping. A colony does not owe the beekeeper its presence. It stays because the conditions in that box are more favorable than the conditions elsewhere, and because the biological investment it has made in that location is too high to abandon. The beekeeper's job, understood this way, is not to manage bees, but to manage conditions, to create and maintain the specific set of circumstances under which a colony's rational biological calculation reliably produces the answer the beekeeper wants. For absconding, that answer is stay. And stay is what a colony with a strong brood nest, established comb, and a location made genuinely hospitable will almost always choose, through dearths and heat and the full stress of August, without being held in place by anything other than its own biology. An empty hive in August is the most expensive lesson in beekeeping, and it is almost always a lesson about something the beekeeper did not provide, rather than something the bees did wrong. The colony made a rational decision with the information available to it. If that information included a strong brood nest, established comb, and a location that had been successfully defended before, the rational decision was to stay. When the information included empty foundation, no young brood, and no biological investment in the current location, the rational decision was to leave. The anchor is not a trick. It is the precondition for commitment. Have you ever walked up to a hive in August and found it completely empty? And did you ever trace it back to what was or was not in the brood nest before it happened? Leave your experience in the comments. Subscribe for more historically grounded beekeeping. And if you want to understand how the same investment biology explains why swarms accept some cavities and reject others, that breakdown is next.